The galaxy holds countless stories, but few have shaped its destiny like that of Luke Skywalker. His journey begins not with a hero's welcome, but in secret and in tragedy. As the fires of the Republic died and the Empire rose from its ashes, 2 infants were born on a remote asteroid medical facility called Polis Massa. The year was 19 BBY, just 2 days after Emperor Palpatine had declared his new galactic empire. Luke and his twin sister Leia entered a galaxy in chaos, born to Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo as she drew her final breaths. Their father, once the great Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, had already fallen to the dark side and become Darth Vader, right hand of the Emperor. This was no ordinary birth. It was a desperate moment, hidden from the watchful eyes of the Empire. Obi-Wan Kenobi, once Anakin's master and closest friend, knew the children would be in grave danger if the Emperor or their father discovered them. Their very existence had to become a secret. And so a fateful decision was made. The twins would be separated, each raised far from their true origins. Leia was adopted by Senator Bail Organa and his wife Breha, becoming a princess of Alderaan. Luke's path led to the harshest environment imaginable, the desert planet Tatooine. This wasn't a random choice. Tatooine was Anakin's homeworld, a place Vader loathed and would avoid at all costs. Luke was brought to the Lars family homestead, a moisture farm in the middle of nowhere. Owen Lars, the son of Klieg Lars, who had married Anakin's mother Shmi, took in his step-nephew along with his wife Beru. The boy would be raised as their own, a simple farm boy with no knowledge of his extraordinary heritage. Life on a moisture farm wasn't easy. Days were filled with hard work under twin suns that baked the landscape. Every drop of water was precious, harvested from the dry air by vaporators that needed constant maintenance. This harsh existence shaped young Luke, teaching him resilience and resourcefulness from his earliest days. Even as a toddler, Luke showed signs that he wasn't quite like other children. When he was just 3 years old, a Gamorrean raider attacked the homestead. In what could only be described as an unconscious use of the Force, Luke used his toy starfighter to distract the attacker, buying precious time for his family. Though no one recognized it then, the power of his father flowed through him. Owen Lars was determined to keep Luke grounded, away from the dangers that had consumed Anakin. Whenever Luke asked about his father, Owen would dismiss the questions with a simple story. He had been a navigator on a spice freighter, nothing more. No talk of Jedi, no mention of the Clone Wars, and certainly nothing about Darth Vader. But someone was watching over Luke from the shadows. Obi-Wan Kenobi, now going by the name Ben, had made his home in the Jundland wastes, living as a hermit. From a distance, he kept vigilant guard over the boy. When Luke was 10, that vigilance proved crucial. A former Inquisitor named Reva Savander, seeking revenge against Vader, tracked Luke to Tatooine. Owen and Beru fought desperately to protect their nephew, but the danger was real. In this moment of crisis, Kenobi revealed himself, returning to save the boy. This brief encounter would be Luke's first meeting with the man who would later change his life, though neither could have known it then. As Luke grew, so did his natural talents. Like Anakin before him, he became an exceptional pilot with lightning-fast reflexes. The T-16 Skyhopper became his escape, racing through the treacherous Beggar's Canyon and perfecting his aim by targeting womp rats in the desert. These weren't just games to Luke, they were a taste of the freedom he craved. Toshi Station became his hangout, a place to meet friends and dream of adventures beyond the horizon. There was Biggs Darklighter, his closest friend who shared his dreams of leaving Tatooine. But not everyone was kind. Some local kids mockingly called him Wormy, never suspecting they were teasing someone who would one day save the galaxy. The longing to leave grew stronger with each passing year. Luke begged his uncle to let him apply to the Imperial Academy, not out of any love for the Empire, but simply as a way off the planet. Owen always refused, saying he needed Luke for one more season on the farm. Each denial added to Luke's frustration, making him feel trapped in an endless cycle of dust and labor. One by one, Luke's friends departed for their own adventures. Biggs left for the academy, promising to return with tales of the stars. Each departure made Tatooine feel smaller, more confining. By the time Luke reached 17, his dreams of escape seemed further away than ever. Little did he know that eyes were still watching. In 2 BBY, after a fateful duel where Kenobi defeated his old enemy Maul, the dying former Sith asked if Luke was the chosen one. Kenobi's answer was simple: he is. In that moment, as Luke went about his chores unaware, his destiny was being spoken into existence. The galaxy was changing. The Empire tightened its grip on thousands of worlds. The first sparks of rebellion were being kindled, and on a forgotten farm on a backwater planet, a young man with the blood of the most powerful Jedi ever born looked up at the stars, unaware that his own story was about to begin. Such was the early life of Luke Skywalker. Not a prince, not a warrior, just a farm boy with sand in his boots and dreams in his heart. The legacy of his father, both the hero and the villain, waited for him among those distant stars. All he needed was a push to begin the journey that would change everything. The year 0, before the Battle of Yavin, marked the moment when a simple purchase changed the course of galactic history. Owen Lars bought 2 droids from a group of Jawas traveling through the desert in their massive sandcrawler. These weren't ordinary droids. They were R2-D2, an astromech with a stubborn personality, and C-3PO, a protocol droid fluent in over 6 million forms of communication. What Owen didn't know was that these droids had just escaped from a rebel ship captured by the Empire, and they carried information that could change the fate of the galaxy. While cleaning the droids, Luke accidentally triggered a partial holographic message stored in R2-D2. The image showed a beautiful young woman pleading for help from someone named Obi-Wan Kenobi. The mysterious woman was Princess Leia Organa, though Luke had no idea she was his twin sister. R2-D2, determined to complete his mission, escaped the farm the next morning, forcing Luke to chase after him into the dangerous Jundland wastes. The pursuit led Luke into the territory of Tusken Raiders, brutal nomads known to most as Sand People. Knocked unconscious by an ambush, Luke was saved by a mysterious figure who scared off the attackers with a strange howl. This rescuer was Ben Kenobi, the old hermit who lived beyond the Dune Sea. But as Luke soon discovered, he was much more than a desert recluse. In Ben's home, Luke mentioned Obi-Wan Kenobi, not realizing he was speaking to the very man. Ben revealed that Obi-Wan was his true name, one he hadn't used since before Luke was born. The revelation came with another surprise. When Ben revealed he had known Luke's father, not as a spice navigator as Owen had claimed, but as a Jedi Knight who fought in the Clone Wars. From an old chest, Ben retrieved an elegant weapon, a lightsaber. He explained that it had belonged to Luke's father, who wanted him to have it when he was old enough. This wasn't just any lightsaber, it was Anakin Skywalker's own blade, a weapon Ben had taken after defeating him on Mustafar. But Ben didn't tell Luke about that battle, or Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader. Instead, he said Vader had betrayed and murdered Luke's father, a partial truth that would have devastating consequences when Luke learned the whole story. It was here, in this humble dwelling, that Luke first heard about the Force. Ben described it as an energy field created by all living things that surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. The Force had given the Jedi their power, and according to Ben, Luke was sensitive to it just like his father had been. When R2-D2 finally played the complete message from Princess Leia, they learned she was asking Obi-Wan to deliver the droid to her father on Alderaan. The droid contained vital information stolen from the Empire. Ben invited Luke to join him, to learn about the Force and help the rebellion. But Luke refused, feeling obligated to return to the farm despite his dreams of adventure. That decision changed when they discovered the Jawas who had sold the droids had been slaughtered by Imperial stormtroopers. Realizing the Empire must be tracking the droids, Luke raced home only to find the homestead in flames and the charred bodies of Owen and Beru. In one brutal moment, the Empire had taken everything from him. With nothing left on Tatooine, Luke chose to follow Ben to Alderaan and learn the ways of the Jedi. Their journey took them to Mos Eisley, a spaceport Ben described as a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Here, Luke had his first real glimpse of the wider galaxy, with its diverse species and dangerous characters. In Chalmun's cantina, Luke narrowly avoided a deadly confrontation with Ponda Baba and Dr. Evazan, saved only by Ben's swift use of his lightsaber. The incident left Luke stunned at the casual violence of the galaxy beyond his sheltered farm life. It was in this same cantina that they met Han Solo, a cocky smuggler, and his Wookiee co-pilot Chewbacca. After some negotiation and Han's boasting about his ship making the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, they hired the pair to transport them to Alderaan aboard the Millennium Falcon, a ship that looked like junk but would prove its worth many times over. As they escaped Tatooine, narrowly avoiding Imperial Star Destroyers, Ben began Luke's training. Using a remote training droid, he taught Luke the basics of sensing the Force and deflecting blaster bolts with a lightsaber. The lesson was challenging. Ben warned that eyes could be deceiving and not to trust them. Instead, Luke had to feel the Force flowing through him, guiding his actions. Han Solo watched these exercises with skeptical amusement. He told Luke that hokey religions and ancient weapons were no match for a good blaster at your side. Despite the smuggler's doubts, Luke showed natural talent, eventually managing to deflect the remote's attacks while blindfolded, just as his father had done during his own training decades earlier. The journey to Alderaan ended in tragedy. Where a peaceful world should have been, they found only an asteroid field. Ben realized what they thought was a moon was actually a space station. The Death Star, the Empire's ultimate weapon, had destroyed Alderaan completely, killing billions of people in an instant to demonstrate its power. Before they could escape, the Millennium Falcon was caught in the Death Star's tractor beam and pulled into its massive hangar bay. Hidden in the ship's smuggling compartments, the group avoided immediate capture. It was then that R2-D2 discovered Princess Leia was being held prisoner on the station, scheduled for execution. While Ben went to disable the tractor beam alone, Luke convinced a reluctant Han to help rescue the princess by promising him a reward. Luke suggested she was rich and powerful and would make it worth his while, appealing to Han's greed. Despite his better judgment, Han agreed to the rescue mission. Disguised as stormtroopers with Chewbacca as their prisoner, Luke and Han infiltrated the detention level. Their rescue attempt was about to throw them into the heart of the conflict against the Empire, a conflict that would transform Luke from a farm boy into something much more. The adventure he had always dreamed of had begun, though in ways far more dangerous and significant than he could have imagined. Infiltrating the most feared battle station in the galaxy wasn't exactly in the Farm Boy handbook. Disguised in the stark white armor of Imperial stormtroopers, Luke and Han made their way to the detention level of the Death Star. Their plan to rescue the princess quickly fell apart when Han improvised a conversation with the officers, ending with blaster fire and alarms blaring throughout the facility. When they finally reached Princess Leia's cell, both rescuers were taken aback. The fierce young senator from Alderaan wasn't what they expected, immediately taking charge of her own rescue and blasting an escape route through a nearby wall. The small group found themselves trapped between patrols of stormtroopers with nowhere to go but down a garbage chute. The foul-smelling compactor seemed like a dead end, especially when the walls began closing in to crush them. Terror struck when something moved beneath the murky water and a tentacled creature, a Dianoga, pulled Luke under. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the journey would end there in the trash, but Luke resurfaced just as C-3PO finally responded to their calls and shut down the compactor. Escaping through the labyrinthine corridors of the Death Star, the group split up. While Luke and the others made their way back to the Millennium Falcon, Ben Kenobi confronted Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel that would be etched into galactic history. Luke arrived just in time to witness the terrible moment when Vader struck down his mentor. What happened next defied explanation. Ben's body simply vanished, leaving only empty robes on the floor as Vader's lightsaber passed through him. In his last act, Ben had created a diversion that allowed Luke and the others to escape. It was a sacrifice that haunted Luke, who had to be physically dragged back to the ship as stormtroopers closed in. With the Death Star plans safely stored in R2-D2, the Millennium Falcon blasted away from the space station, fighting off Imperial TIE fighters in a frantic escape. Though they didn't know it yet, the Empire had placed a tracking device aboard the ship, leading the Death Star directly to the secret rebel base on Yavin 4. The jungle moon of Yavin served as the perfect hidden base for the struggling Alliance. Ancient temples rose above the forest canopy, repurposed to house starfighters and command centers. When Luke arrived with the plans, Alliance leaders immediately identified a potential weakness in the Death Star's design: a small thermal exhaust port leading directly to the station's main reactor. Among the pilots preparing for the desperate assault, Luke found a familiar face. Biggs Darklighter, his childhood friend from Tatooine, had joined the rebellion years earlier. Their reunion was brief but meaningful. Two farm boys now fighting for the fate of the galaxy. While pilots readied for battle, Han Solo collected his reward for rescuing the princess and prepared to leave. Despite Luke's pleas for him to stay and help, the smuggler insisted that fighting against the Empire was suicide. The disappointment stung Luke, who had begun to see Han as more than just a hired pilot. The mission briefing laid bare just how desperate their situation was. The small exhaust port was only 2 meters wide, requiring a precise hit with proton torpedoes while flying through a heavily defended trench at high speed. For many of the pilots, the mission seemed impossible, but Luke's experience bullseyeing womp rats in Beggar's Canyon gave him confidence they could succeed. Taking the call sign Red 5, Luke climbed into an X-Wing fighter for the first time. The sleek craft was far more advanced than his T-16 Skyhopper, but the controls felt natural in his hands. R2-D2, now serving as his astromech droid, was loaded into the socket behind the cockpit. Together, they joined the small fleet of fighters leaving the jungle moon to face the approaching Death Star. The Battle of Yavin began with a grim reality check. As Y-Wings and X-Wings swarmed the massive station, turbo laser fire and TIE fighters tore through their ranks. The first attempt at the trench run failed completely. When Gold Leader and his Y-Wings were destroyed one by one, the desperate nature of their situation became clear. For the second attempt, Red Leader took his X-Wings into the trench. Luke watched anxiously as they made their run, only to witness Darth Vader personally leading the defense in his distinctive TIE Advanced. When Red Leader's torpedoes missed the target by mere meters and his fighter crashed into the surface, command fell to Luke. With Biggs and Wedge Antilles as his wingmen, Luke dove into the trench for the final attempt. The narrow corridor became a killing field as Vader and his pilots picked off rebel fighters. Wedge had to pull out with damage to his ship. Moments later, Biggs' X-Wing exploded in a ball of fire. Suddenly, Luke was alone, racing down the trench with Vader closing in from behind. As targeting computers locked onto the exhaust port, Luke heard a familiar voice. Ben Kenobi, somehow reaching out from beyond death, urged him to trust in the Force. In that crucial moment, Luke made a decision that defied all military logic. He switched off his targeting computer, choosing to rely on the Force instead of technology. The gamble paid off. Just as Vader was about to destroy Luke's fighter, the Millennium Falcon appeared from above, blasting one of Vader's wingmen and sending the Sith Lord's ship spinning out of control into space. Han had returned at the last possible moment. With the way clear, Luke fired his torpedoes, which curved impossibly into the exhaust port and disappeared into the Death Star's core. The fighters raced away as the Death Star exploded behind them, sending a shockwave across space that marked the rebellion's first major victory against the Empire. In one moment, Luke Skywalker had gone from unknown farm boy to the hero who destroyed the most feared weapon in the galaxy. Back at the rebel base, celebration filled the ancient temple. In a formal ceremony, Princess Leia presented Luke and Han with medals of bravery as hundreds of rebel troops stood at attention. Chewbacca received his medal as well, towering over the human recipients. The ceremony marked not just recognition of their bravery, but the beginning of a new chapter for the rebellion. With his name now known throughout the galaxy, Luke accepted a commission as an officer in the Alliance military. His skills as a pilot led him to take command of Rogue Squadron, an elite fighter group that would become legendary for taking on the most dangerous missions against Imperial forces. Between battles, Luke struggled to continue his Jedi training without a mentor. He practiced with his lightsaber, attempting to recreate the exercises Ben had shown him aboard the Falcon. His growing awareness of the Force helped in combat, but he knew he had barely scratched the surface of what it meant to be a Jedi. This thirst for knowledge led him to seek out places strong in the Force. On Deveron, he explored the ancient temple of Edith, hoping to find wisdom in its ruins. His mission to Vrogas Vas put him in direct conflict with Darth Vader for the first time since the Death Star's destruction, as both sought Jedi artifacts hidden on the remote world. These expeditions were as dangerous as they were educational. Bounty hunters pursued Luke relentlessly, drawn by the massive Imperial bounty on his head. Each encounter with Imperial forces risked capture by Vader, whose interest in the young pilot had intensified after learning his name. The man who destroyed the Death Star was also the son he thought had died with Padme Amidala. Through it all, Luke balanced his responsibilities to the rebellion with his desire to follow the Jedi path. Each battle honed his piloting skills, each mission expanded his leadership abilities, and each quiet moment allowed him to explore his connection to the Force. The journey from moisture farmer to rebel hero was complete, but his path to becoming a Jedi Knight had only just begun. 3 years after the destruction of the Death Star, the Empire's obsession with crushing the rebellion had only intensified. The Alliance had established a new base on Hoth, a remote ice planet in the Outer Rim. Here, amid temperatures cold enough to freeze skin on contact, Commander Luke Skywalker led reconnaissance missions across the frozen wastes. During a routine patrol, Luke encountered something unexpected. A massive Wampa ice creature attacked without warning, killing his Tauntaun mount and dragging Luke to its cave. Hanging upside down from the icy ceiling, moments from becoming the Predator's next meal, Luke reached for the lightsaber that seemed just beyond his grasp. This desperate moment became his first real use of telekinesis, as he called the weapon to his hand through the Force and freed himself. Wounded and disoriented, Luke stumbled out into a blizzard so fierce it made the cave seem welcoming by comparison. As hypothermia set in, a familiar presence appeared before him. Ben Kenobi, somehow visible despite having fallen at Vader's hand, instructed Luke to seek out another Jedi Master named Yoda in the Dagobah system. Before Luke could learn more, he collapsed into the snow. His life was saved by Han Solo, who braved the deadly cold to find his friend. After recovering in a Bacta tank, Luke barely had time to thank Han before Imperial forces discovered their base. AT-AT walkers, massive armored transports, marched across the snow plains toward Echo Base. In the desperate battle that followed, Luke led his snowspeeder squadron against these mechanized giants, ultimately falling back when the base defenses collapsed. As Alliance transports evacuated personnel, Luke split off from the main fleet. Instead of rejoining the rebellion at the rendezvous point, he set course for Dagobah, a planet that wasn't even recorded in many navigational charts. With R2-D2 as his only companion, Luke piloted his X-Wing into the unknown, guided by Ben's final instructions and his own growing connection to the Force. Dagobah proved to be nothing like Tatooine or Hoth. The swamp planet teemed with life, its atmosphere thick with humidity and the sounds of creatures hidden in the mist. Luke's fighter crashed into a murky lake, leaving him stranded in what seemed like an uninhabited wilderness. As he set up camp, a small, elderly creature appeared, seemingly curious about the off-world visitor. The diminutive being, speaking in reversed sentence structures and behaving erratically, initially annoyed Luke with his meddling and strange manner. Only when the creature reacted to Luke mentioning Yoda did the truth become clear. This was no ordinary swamp dweller, but Yoda himself, the Jedi Master he had been seeking. The odd behavior had been a test of Luke's patience and character, one that revealed his impulsivity and frustration. Despite reservations about Luke's temperament, Yoda agreed to train him in the ways of the Force. The training was nothing like Luke expected. Rather than lightsaber techniques or telekinesis, Yoda emphasized meditation, spiritual connection, and control over one's emotions. Physical challenges tested Luke's endurance as he ran through the swamp with the ancient Jedi Master riding on his back, or performed handstands while levitating objects with his mind. For a young man raised on action and adventure, these lessons in stillness and concentration proved difficult. Luke's first genuine failure came when he tried to raise his sunken X-wing from the lake using the Force. Despite Yoda's insistence that size didn't matter and that objects only appeared heavy to the untrained mind, Luke could not believe it was possible. His lack of faith became a self-fulfilling limitation. Only by watching Yoda himself lift the massive starfighter did Luke begin to understand the true potential of the Force. The most harrowing lesson came when Yoda directed Luke to a cave strong with the dark side. Inside this nightmarish place, Luke confronted an apparition of Darth Vader. Drawing his lightsaber, Luke defeated the specter, only to watch in horror as the mask split open to reveal his own face beneath it. This vision, though confusing at the time, was the Force warning Luke about his own potential for darkness if he followed his father's path. Training continued as Luke grew stronger each day, but the tranquility of Dagobah was shattered when he experienced vivid visions of his friends in pain. Han, Leia, and Chewbacca appeared to be suffering in a city of clouds, a place Luke had never seen but recognized as real. These premonitions became so intense that Luke could no longer focus on his lessons. When he declared his intention to leave and help his friends, both Yoda and the spirit of Ben Kenobi appeared before him. Their warnings were dire. Luke was not ready to face Vader. His training was incomplete. The vision could be a trap, but Luke's loyalty to his friends outweighed even his commitment to becoming a Jedi. Promising to return and complete his training, he departed Dagobah with R2-D2, setting course for Bespin and its famed Cloud City. The floating metropolis among the clouds seemed peaceful when Luke arrived, but he sensed danger permeating the corridors. Moving cautiously through the massive facility, Luke found himself separated from the familiar cylindrical corridors and pristine white walls of the upper levels. Instead, he descended into the industrial heart of the city, where carbon freezing chambers and processing vents created a labyrinthine maze of shadows and hissing steam. It was here, in this mechanical underworld, that Luke first heard the distinctive mechanical breathing. Vader had been waiting, using Han and Leia as bait in an elaborate trap. The duel that followed pushed Luke to his limits. Though he had improved since his training on Dagobah, he was still no match for the Sith Lord, who seemed to be testing him rather than trying to kill him outright. Their combat carried them through chambers and across catwalks, lightsabers illuminating the darkness with their crimson and azure blades. Despite his best efforts, Luke was driven back, eventually losing his balance at the edge of a platform. In that vulnerable moment, Vader's lightsaber slashed down, severing Luke's right hand and sending both it and Anakin's lightsaber plummeting into the abyss below. Wounded and cornered, Luke faced not just physical defeat, but a psychological blow that would change him forever. Vader revealed the truth that Ben had hidden from him. He was not the man who murdered Luke's father. He was Luke's father. The revelation struck harder than any lightsaber blow. Everything Luke believed about himself, his heritage, and his purpose suddenly shattered. As he reeled from this terrible truth, Vader extended an offer. Together, father and son could overthrow the Emperor and rule the galaxy. The temptation to join his newly discovered father warred with everything Luke had come to believe about the Force and the Jedi path. In that moment of supreme crisis, Luke made his choice. Rather than turn to the dark side, he let go, falling backward into the shaft below, preferring death to joining Vader. His fall ended not in death, but in a maintenance tube that ejected him beneath the floating city. Clinging to a weather vane with his remaining hand, Luke reached out through the Force in desperation. Against all odds, Leia sensed his call. The Millennium Falcon, piloted by Lando Calrissian, swooped beneath the city to rescue him. As medical droids fitted Luke with a cybernetic replacement for his lost hand, he gazed out at the stars from the Falcon's viewport. The revelation of his parentage was a wound deeper than the loss of his hand, one that would take far longer to heal. His father was not a fallen hero, but a monster who had terrorized the galaxy for decades. This truth forced Luke to reconsider everything about his identity and his future as a Jedi. 1 year after the devastating revelations at Cloud City, Luke Skywalker returned to his home planet of Tatooine. This time, he wasn't a naive farm boy, but a more disciplined warrior with a purpose. His mission to rescue Han Solo from the clutches of Jabba the Hutt, the notorious crime lord who had kept Solo frozen in carbonite as a macabre trophy for the past year. The rescue plan was methodical and carefully staged. C-3PO and R2-D2 entered Jabba's palace first, carrying a message from Luke. In this recording, Luke offered himself and the droids as gifts to the crime lord, a gesture Jabba predictably ignored, keeping the droids but refusing to release Han. Next came Leia, disguised as a bounty hunter, bringing Chewbacca as her supposed captive. She managed to free Han from carbonite, but was caught and forced to become one of Jabba's slaves. When all these preliminary moves were in place, Luke himself entered the palace. His black attire marked a stark contrast to the white farm boy clothes he'd once worn, reflecting his evolution as a Jedi. The palace guards tried to block his way, but Luke used a mind trick to bypass them, demonstrating how far his abilities had developed since his training with Yoda. Despite his new skills, Luke underestimated Jabba's defenses. The floor beneath him gave way, dropping him into a pit housing Jabba's monstrous pet Rancor. The massive creature had devoured countless victims for Jabba's entertainment, but Luke refused to become another spectacle. Using quick thinking and his Jedi abilities, he managed to crush the beast under a heavy security door, killing it. Furious at losing his prized pet, Jabba sentenced Luke, Han, and Chewbacca to death. They would be thrown into the great pit of Carkoon, home to the Sarlacc, a creature that supposedly digested its victims over 1,000 years. The prisoners were transported across the desert on Jabba's sail barge, seemingly headed for a grim fate. At the execution site, with his hands bound and poised on the plank above the pit, Luke signaled to R2-D2. The small droid launched Luke's new lightsaber, hidden inside his dome, high into the air. Luke caught the weapon, ignited its green blade, and leapt into action. The color of his new lightsaber symbolized his growth, green being traditionally used by Jedi counselors who focused on harmony with the Force. Chaos erupted on the sail barge as Luke freed his friends and battled Jabba's guards. Meanwhile, Leia seized the opportunity to strangle Jabba with the very chain he had used to enslave her. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present, the former princess turning the tools of her oppression against her captor. With Jabba dead and Han freed, the group destroyed the sail barge with its own weapons, creating a massive explosion in the Tatooine desert as they escaped. The rescue wasn't just about saving a friend. It represented Luke coming full circle, returning to his home planet not as a powerless youth, but as a capable Jedi who could face his past and shape his own destiny. With Han rescued, Luke kept another promise, returning to Dagobah to complete his training with Yoda. The swamp planet was just as he remembered it, but Yoda was not. The ancient Jedi Master had grown visibly weaker, his 900 years finally catching up with him. As Luke sat by his bedside, Yoda confirmed the terrible truth Luke had been struggling to accept. Darth Vader was indeed his father, Anakin Skywalker. With his last breaths, Yoda told Luke his formal training was complete, though he still faced his final test as a Jedi. The dying master also left Luke with a cryptic message about another Skywalker, words that confused Luke at the time. Then, peaceful and accepting of his fate, Yoda became one with the Force, his physical body vanishing as he died. Alone and seeking answers, Luke was visited by the spirit of Ben Kenobi. The conversation that followed filled in crucial gaps in Luke's understanding of his family history. Ben revealed that the other Skywalker Yoda mentioned was Leia, Luke's twin sister. The siblings had been separated at birth to protect them from the Emperor and their father. Leia had been adopted by Bail Organa of Alderaan, while Luke was sent to Tatooine. This revelation explained the connection Luke had always felt with Leia, a bond that went beyond friendship or romantic interest. It also clarified why she had been able to sense him calling for help beneath Cloud City. The Skywalker legacy didn't rest on Luke's shoulders alone. It was shared by the sister he never knew he had. When Ben suggested that Luke might have to face and destroy Vader, Luke made a declaration that would define his path forward. He insisted there was still good in his father, that Anakin Skywalker wasn't fully consumed by Darth Vader. This belief, this faith in redemption, set Luke apart from his mentors who saw Vader as lost to the dark side. Meanwhile, the rebellion was preparing for a decisive strike against the Empire. Intelligence had revealed the construction of a second Death Star in orbit around the forest moon of Endor. This new battle station was protected by a shield generator on the moon's surface, which had to be destroyed before any attack on the Death Star itself could succeed. Luke joined the strike team led by Han Solo, tasked with infiltrating Endor and destroying the shield generator. Leia, Chewbacca, and the droids completed the team, along with a commando unit of Alliance soldiers. Using a stolen Imperial shuttle, they managed to bypass the Imperial blockade and land on the forested moon. On Endor, the team encountered the native Ewoks, small bear-like creatures who initially saw the newcomers as enemies or potential food. Through a combination of C-3PO's translation skills and demonstrations of Luke's Force abilities, They convinced the tribal Ewoks to join their cause against the Empire, adding crucial local knowledge and surprising fighting ability to their forces. As the mission progressed, Luke began to sense Vader's presence. Realizing he was endangering his friends by remaining with them, he confessed to Leia that she was his sister and Vader was their father. This burden shared, Luke surrendered himself to Imperial forces, believing he could confront Vader away from the battle and perhaps reach whatever remained of Anakin Skywalker. The gamble brought Luke face to face with his father once more. In a forest clearing on Endor, Luke tried to appeal to the good he sensed in Vader. For a brief moment, it seemed he might be getting through, but Vader's loyalty to the Emperor remained too strong. Vader dismissed Luke's plea and took him to the Death Star, where Emperor Palpatine awaited. The decrepit Sith Lord had orchestrated their meeting, seeing Luke as either a potential new apprentice or a threat to be eliminated. The throne room aboard the Death Star became the stage for Luke's greatest test, as Palpatine tried to corrupt him through anger and fear. The Emperor revealed his most devastating trap. The rebel fleet arriving to attack the Death Star was flying into an ambush. The shield was still operational, and Imperial forces were waiting. From the throne room viewport, Luke watched helplessly as rebel ships were caught between the Death Star's firepower and the Imperial fleet. Palpatine pressed his psychological attack, encouraging Luke to take his lightsaber and strike him down, knowing that an attack born of hatred would push Luke toward the dark side. Luke's resistance eventually broke. He called his lightsaber to his hand and swung at the Emperor, only to have his father's red blade block the attack. The final duel between father and son had begun, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. The lightsaber duel between father and son escalated through the Death Star's throne room. Unlike their confrontation on Cloud City, Luke initially held back, defending rather than attacking. He wasn't there to defeat Vader. He was there to save Anakin Skywalker. Even as the red and green blades clashed, Luke continued to appeal to the good he sensed within his father. The Emperor watched from his throne, savoring the conflict. Each strike fueled by anger pushed Luke closer to the dark side. Each moment of hesitation from Vader signaled the internal struggle of Anakin Skywalker, fighting to break free from decades of darkness. The room crackled with more than just lightsaber energy. The very fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Luke disengaged, refusing to continue the fight. He concealed himself in the shadows beneath the throne room platform, telling his father there was no need for this conflict. For a moment, it seemed his refusal to fight might actually work. Vader paused, perhaps considering his son's words. Then the dynamic shifted dramatically. Vader, using the Force to probe Luke's thoughts, discovered the truth about Leia. The realization that he had a daughter as well as a son gave the Dark Lord new leverage. He suggested that if Luke wouldn't turn to the dark side, perhaps Leia would. The threat against his sister shattered Luke's restraint. Rage erupted from the young Jedi. The calm, controlled Luke vanished, replaced by a whirlwind of fury. His attacks became relentless, driving Vader back across catwalks and downstairs. The green lightsaber struck again and again, beating down Vader's defenses. The Emperor smiled from his perch, witnessing exactly what he had hoped for, Luke embracing his anger. The brutal assault culminated when Luke slashed through Vader's wrist, sending his father's mechanical hand and lightsaber tumbling into the depths below. The parallel was impossible to miss. Luke stared at Vader's severed appendage, then at his own black-gloved mechanical hand, the result of their previous duel. In that instant of clarity, Luke saw the path he was walking, a path that led directly to becoming what he had sworn to defeat. The Emperor descended from his throne, his withered face twisted in triumph. He urged Luke to complete his journey to the dark side by killing his father and taking Vader's place. The galaxy would be his to command, if only he would embrace hatred as his ally. Standing at this crossroads, Luke made the decision that would define not just his life, but the future of the Jedi. He deactivated his lightsaber and tossed it aside. With quiet determination, he declared himself a Jedi, like his father before him. He would not kill Vader, would not surrender to hatred. He chose compassion over power, mercy over vengeance, even knowing it might cost him everything. Palpatine's reptilian smile vanished. If Luke wouldn't turn, then he would die. Raising his gnarled hands, the Emperor unleashed Force lightning, blue electrical energy that engulfed Luke in agony. The attack wasn't designed for a quick kill, but for prolonged suffering. Luke collapsed to the floor, writhing as the lightning continued to course through his body. Through waves of pain, Luke called out to his father for help. Vader rose to his feet, watching his son being tortured. The Emperor intensified his attack, promising Luke a slow death. In this moment of ultimate crisis, something shifted within the Dark Lord of the Sith. Perhaps it was seeing his son willing to die rather than turn to the dark side. Perhaps it was hearing Luke's pleas for help, so similar to how Padme had once pleaded with Anakin before his fall. Whatever the spark, Anakin Skywalker began to emerge from behind Vader's mask. In a decision that reversed 23 years of loyal service to the Emperor, Vader seized his master. Despite the lightning now redirected at him, causing critical damage to his life support systems, Anakin lifted Palpatine over his head. With his remaining strength, he carried the Emperor to a nearby shaft and threw him into the abyss. The Sith Lord fell, screaming into the Death Star's reactor core, where his body erupted in an explosion of dark force energy. The act of saving his son cost Anakin everything. The Emperor's lightning had damaged his suit beyond repair. His breathing became labored, each mechanical inhalation weaker than the last. Knowing he had little time left, Anakin asked Luke to help him remove his mask so he could look upon his son with his own eyes for the first and last time. Luke gently lifted the fearsome black helmet, revealing not a monster, but a scarred, pale man with kind eyes. For 23 years, the galaxy had known only Darth Vader. But in these final moments, Anakin Skywalker had returned. He told Luke that he had been right. There had been good in him after all. With those words of reconciliation, Anakin Skywalker died, finally free from the darkness that had consumed him for so long. Around them, the Death Star was beginning to break apart. The rebel fleet had succeeded in destroying the main reactor, and the battle station's destruction was imminent. Despite the danger, Luke refused to leave his father's body behind. He carried Anakin to a shuttle and escaped just as the Death Star exploded, creating a fireball visible from the surface of Endor below. On the forest moon, the celebration had already begun. The shield generator was destroyed. The Death Star was gone. and the Emperor's reign of terror had ended. But Luke stood apart from the festivities. In a clearing away from the Ewok village, he built a funeral pyre in the tradition of the Jedi Order. As flames consumed Vader's armor and mechanical remains, Luke said goodbye not to the Dark Lord who had terrorized the galaxy, but to the father he had barely known. The pyre released Anakin's spirit, finally cleansed of the darkness that had claimed him so many years ago. When Luke finally joined the celebration, he carried with him the knowledge that he had succeeded where the old Jedi Order had failed. The Jedi had tried to destroy Vader. Luke had redeemed Anakin Skywalker. His compassion had accomplished what power could not. As the festivities continued around him, Luke stepped away for a moment of quiet reflection. In the soft light of the forest, he saw three luminous figures watching over him: Ben Kenobi, Master Yoda, and now Anakin Skywalker, restored to his younger self before the dark side claimed him. The three generations of Jedi nodded to Luke in acknowledgement of what he had achieved. Through Luke's faith and compassion, Anakin had fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One, bringing balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. The Emperor was gone, Vader was no more, and Anakin had died at peace with himself and his son. The redemption came too late for them to have the relationship they might have had, but it closed a cycle of pain and suffering that had consumed the galaxy for decades. This act of redemption would shape Luke's understanding of the Force going forward. Where the old Jedi had maintained that once someone fell to the dark side, they were forever lost, Luke had proven that redemption was possible. His willingness to see the light in the darkest of places would become the foundation of his approach to rebuilding the Jedi Order. The victory at Endor marked the beginning of the end for the Empire, but for Luke Skywalker, it marked something even more significant. The farm boy from Tatooine had become a Jedi Knight, not by destroying what he hated, but by saving what he loved. In choosing mercy over vengeance, Luke had not only redeemed his father, but had redefined what it meant to be a Jedi in a galaxy desperately in need of new hope. The defeat of the Emperor and the redemption of Anakin Skywalker marked the end of the Sith, but for Luke, it was just the beginning of a new mission. In the aftermath of the Battle of Endor, while the Rebel Alliance transformed into the New Republic and began the long process of restoring democracy to the galaxy, Luke set out on a different path. He had become the last Jedi, inheriting the responsibility to ensure that the Order would not end with him. The task before him was monumental. Emperor Palpatine had spent decades systematically erasing Jedi knowledge from the galaxy. Records were destroyed, temples were demolished or converted for Imperial use, and those who remembered the Jedi were silenced. Luke had completed his own training, but rebuilding an order that had existed for thousands of years required much more than what Yoda and Ben had been able to teach him. Luke began searching the galaxy for fragments of Jedi wisdom that had survived the Purge. In this quest, he found an unexpected ally in Lor San Tekka, a member of the Church of the Force. This spiritual organization had venerated the Jedi and preserved what knowledge they could through the dark times of Imperial rule. Though not Force-sensitive himself, Lor San Tekka became Luke's guide to worlds where Jedi history might still be found. Their journey took them to places strong in the Force. On Pelio, Luke discovered one of the Emperor's observatories, a storehouse of artifacts Palpatine had collected rather than destroyed. Among the treasures there, Luke found a Jedi star compass, an ancient device that responded to Force energies and would eventually help him on his greatest quest. The desert world of Moraband, ancient homeworld of the Sith, held dark secrets but also insights into the history of the Force. On Tython, site of one of the earliest Jedi temples, Luke studied ancient meditation techniques that helped him deepen his connection to the Force. Each location added pieces to the puzzle, but perhaps his most significant discovery came on Ossus. This ancient world had once housed one of the greatest Jedi libraries in the galaxy. Though largely destroyed during the Great Sith War thousands of years earlier, Luke managed to recover texts and holocrons that had survived both that ancient conflict and the more recent Imperial Purge. These included records preserved by Jedi librarian Jocasta Nu, who had hidden a cache of knowledge before her death at the hands of Darth Vader. Through years of searching, Luke assembled a collection of irreplaceable Jedi writings. The Ramagon, a text believed destroyed more than 5,000 years ago, contained some of the earliest known writings on the Force. The two-volume Aeonomica explored the philosophy of the Jedi and their approach to the cosmic and living Force. Luke also recovered a Jedi Crusader pendant, a relic from an ancient conflict that would later influence his understanding of Jedi history. As valuable as these artifacts were, Luke became increasingly focused on one particular objective: finding the site of the first Jedi Temple. He believed that the birthplace of the Order would contain wisdom crucial to properly restoring the Jedi path. Using the star compass from Pilio and studying the spread of Force-sensitive Uneti trees, whose saplings had grown from the original tree at the first temple, Luke pieced together the location of a remote planet called Ahch-To. What he found there exceeded his expectations. Temple Island on Ahch-To contained not just ruins of the first Jedi Temple, but a tree containing sacred texts preserved for countless generations. Luke kept this discovery secret, sharing it only with Lor San Tekka. Even as he continued to aid the New Republic, he made preparations for eventually training a new generation of Jedi, armed with knowledge both ancient and modern. Before establishing a formal academy, Luke took on his first student, one whose Force sensitivity matched his own, his twin sister, Leia. Though she had chosen a path of political leadership rather than Jedi training after Endor, Leia recognized the importance of understanding her abilities. At her suggestion, they trained together on the jungle moon of Ajan Klos, a world whose dense foliage reminded Luke somewhat of Dagobah, though considerably less swampy and far more hospitable. Under Luke's guidance, Leia constructed her own lightsaber. Luke taught her the principles of the different lightsaber forms, meditation techniques, and how to consciously access the Force abilities she had previously used only instinctively. Luke was amazed by how quickly Leia progressed. Her connection to the Force was every bit as strong as his own, and in some areas, particularly those requiring mental discipline, she showed even greater aptitude. Yet their training together came to an abrupt end when Leia experienced a troubling vision. She foresaw that continuing on the Jedi path would somehow lead to the death of her unborn son. Though Luke reassured her that visions of the future were always in motion, Leia chose to set aside her training, hanging up her lightsaber and focusing on building the New Republic. In approximately 9 ABY, about 5 years after the Battle of Endor, Luke experienced a powerful disturbance in the Force. A young Force-sensitive child was reaching out, almost like a beacon. Following this call, Luke tracked the source to an Imperial light cruiser commanded by Moff Gideon, one of the Imperial warlords still resisting the New Republic. Aboard the cruiser, Luke encountered something he had never seen before: a platoon of dark troopers, advanced battle droids that combined the worst aspects of Imperial stormtroopers and assassin droids. In a display of how far his abilities had progressed since Endor, Luke single-handedly defeated these fearsome opponents, his green lightsaber carving through metal with the same precision once reserved for his X-Wing runs through Beggar's Canyon. The child Luke found was unlike any being he had encountered before. Named Grogu, he was the same species as Master Yoda, already 50 years old despite appearing as a toddler. Despite his young appearance, Grogu had received training at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant before the Purge, making him one of the few surviving links to the old Jedi Order. Recognizing Grogu's potential and vulnerability to the dark side, Luke offered to train him. This meant separating the child from Din Djarin, a Mandalorian warrior who had become Grogu's protector and father figure. The separation proved difficult for both Grogu and Din, highlighting a tension between the traditional Jedi prohibition on attachments and the very real bonds that gave meaning to people's lives. Though Luke began Grogu's training with the best intentions, it was ultimately short-lived. The bond between Grogu and Din proved stronger than the call of Jedi training. When given a choice between continuing his path as a Jedi or returning to Din, Grogu chose his Mandalorian caretaker. This decision would later influence Luke's thinking about the role of emotional connections in a Jedi's life. With the knowledge gathered from his explorations and the experience gained from training both Leia and Grogu, Luke finally established a proper Jedi training temple in 15 ABY. He chose Ossus as the site, building upon the ancient Jedi presence there. His first full-time student was his nephew, Ben Solo, son of Leia and Han. Luke took special care with his training, aware of both the legacy and the burden that came with their shared heritage. Over time, the academy grew to include about a dozen students of various ages and backgrounds, each showing force sensitivity and a desire to follow the Jedi path. In teaching these new Jedi, Luke tried to balance the traditional wisdom he had recovered with the insights gained through his own experiences. Where the old order had emphasized emotional detachment, Luke recognized the power of compassion and connection, having seen firsthand how love had redeemed his father. He hoped to create a new Jedi Order that avoided the blindness and rigidity that had contributed to the fall of the Old One, while preserving the dedication to peace and justice that had made the Jedi the guardians of the Republic for 1,000 generations. The Jedi Academy on Ossus represented everything Luke had worked towards since the Battle of Endor. A new generation of Force users learning the ways of the Jedi, guided by ancient wisdom and tempered by the lessons of recent history. At the center of this hopeful rebirth was Ben Solo. His training wasn't simply a matter of education, it was an intervention. Leia had sent him to Luke after sensing the dark side taking hold in her son. Strange nightmares had plagued Ben since childhood, and his emotional outbursts had grown more concerning as he approached adolescence. Leia hoped her brother could provide the guidance she and Han, neither trained as Jedi, could not. From the beginning, Ben showed extraordinary potential. His Skywalker bloodline gave him natural strength in the Force that surpassed many of Luke's other students. Luke took special pride in his nephew's progress, seeing in Ben the future of the Jedi Order he was trying to rebuild. Master and apprentice developed a close bond, with Luke often taking Ben on expeditions to recover Jedi artifacts, while other students remained at the temple. Together they explored forgotten outposts and ancient ruins, recovering holocrons containing the wisdom of long-dead Jedi Masters and texts describing techniques not practiced for generations. These journeys strengthened their connection and accelerated Ben's training, but they also contained the seeds of future problems. At Leia's request, Luke kept certain truths from Ben about their family heritage. The young Solo knew his grandfather had been a Jedi named Anakin Skywalker, but not that Anakin had fallen to become Darth Vader. This omission, meant to protect Ben from a painful legacy, would later feel like a betrayal when he discovered the truth from outside sources. Luke's concerns about his nephew first crystallized during a mission in 19 ABY. Luke, Ben, and Lor San Tekka traveled to Elphrona, where they'd received reports of a Jedi outpost untouched since the Clone Wars. Inside, they found not only Jedi artifacts, but unwelcome visitors, the Knights of Ren, a band of dark side warriors who followed a leader simply called Ren. When the Knights threatened violence, Luke demonstrated why he was considered the most powerful Jedi Master in the galaxy. Without taking a life, he defeated all 7 Knights, displaying mastery of lightsaber combat and Force techniques that left even Ben in awe. The confrontation ended with the Knights retreating, but not before their leader delivered an ominous warning about Ben. Ren claimed to sense the dark side already strong within the boy, offering Ben a place with the Knights should he ever choose to follow a different path than the one his uncle laid before him. Though Ben rejected the offer, Luke noticed how his nephew's eyes lingered on the Knights' weapons and regalia. The incident reinforced Luke's determination to guide Ben away from darkness, but also planted questions in the young Solo's mind about paths not taken. What Luke couldn't know was that Ben had been under outside influence for years. A powerful dark side practitioner named Snoke had been reaching out to Ben through the Force since his childhood, whispering into his dreams, amplifying his insecurities, and slowly turning him against his family. These manipulations were subtle enough to escape Luke's notice, attributed to normal teenage rebellion rather than external corruption. In reality, Snoke himself was merely a puppet, a creation of the supposedly dead Emperor Palpatine, who had survived his fall on the second Death Star through dark side techniques. From his hidden base on Exegol, Palpatine was orchestrating the corruption of Anakin Skywalker's grandson as part of his plan for eventual return. The tentacles of the Sith stretched across the galaxy, unseen even by the last Jedi Master. As Ben grew older, his behavior became more concerning. Luke occasionally caught glimpses of darkness during training sessions, moments where Ben's aggression exceeded what was appropriate for Jedi exercises. There were incidents with other students, though never severe enough to warrant extreme measures. Luke believed he could still reach his nephew, still guide him back toward the light. The breaking point came in 28 ABY. For months, Luke had sensed the darkness growing stronger in Ben. One night, driven by mounting concern, Luke went to his nephew's hut while Ben slept. Standing over his unconscious form, Luke reached out with the Force to probe Ben's mind, an invasion of privacy he would later deeply regret. What Luke found horrified him. Snoke had completely turned Ben's heart. His mind was filled with visions of destruction, the deaths of everything Luke loved, the return of the dark times. In a moment of pure instinct, the same instinct that had nearly driven him to kill Vader before he pulled back, Luke activated his lightsaber. The thought of killing Ben, of stopping this threat before it could manifest, flashed through his mind. The impulse passed almost instantly. Horror at his own reaction replaced fear of what Ben might become. Luke had nearly repeated the mistake of the old Jedi, responding to the possibility of darkness with violence rather than compassion. But it was too late. Ben had awakened to find his uncle standing over him, green lightsaber humming with deadly energy, betrayal written across Luke's face. In that moment, everything Snoke had told Ben about his family planning to destroy him seemed confirmed. Ben reacted with panic and rage, calling his own lightsaber to his hand and lashing out. The two blades connected briefly before Ben used the Force to bring the hut's stone walls crashing down upon his uncle. Luke was knocked unconscious beneath the rubble. By the time he freed himself, tragedy had already unfolded. Ben, consumed by betrayal and unleashed anger, had tapped into powers he could barely control. Storm clouds gathered above the temple as Ben called down Force lightning, a Sith technique he shouldn't have known. The Academy building was obliterated in the ensuing storm. Emerging from the ruins of Ben's hut, Luke witnessed the aftermath of his momentary lapse. The temple was in flames. Bodies of students lay scattered across the grounds. Others had vanished, either killed in the initial explosion or gone with Ben. Everything Luke had built, the future he had envisioned for the Jedi Order, was literally and figuratively in ashes. The loss devastated Luke on every level. Some of his students had been with him for over a decade. Each death represented not just a personal failure to protect those in his care, but the loss of a beacon of light meant to help guide the galaxy forward. Most painful was the knowledge that his own action, that split second of fear, had been the catalyst for this disaster. In the days that followed, Luke learned that Ben had taken some of his fellow students and slaughtered the rest. His nephew had fully embraced the dark side, taking the name Kylo Ren and joining with Snoke as his apprentice. The Knights of Ren, who had offered Ben a place years earlier, now followed him as their leader. The son of Leia Organa and Han Solo, grandson of Anakin Skywalker, had fallen to darkness just as his grandfather had before him. The failure broke something fundamental in Luke Skywalker. The optimism that had allowed him to see good in Darth Vader, the determination that had rebuilt the Jedi from scattered fragments, gave way to despair. Luke began to question not just his own ability as a teacher, but the entire Jedi legacy. He saw his failure with Ben as part of a larger pattern, the same blindness that had allowed Palpatine to destroy the old order now repeating with himself and Snoke. Luke made a decision that shocked those few who knew of it. He would exile himself from the galaxy, cutting himself off from the Force entirely. He left clues to his location in various fragments, the largest piece with Lor San Tekka, but made it deliberately difficult for anyone to find him. He took an X-Wing to Ahch-To, site of the first Jedi Temple, landing on a remote island and sinking his ship offshore to prevent easy departure. On this isolated island, surrounded by the ancient stone huts of the first Jedi, Luke intended to live out his remaining days. The last Jedi would die with him, ending what he had come to see as a cycle of failure and hubris. He took with him the ancient Jedi texts recovered throughout his journeys, not to study them, but to ensure they would end with him. Luke Skywalker, once the brightest hope for the galaxy, had decided that the greatest service he could offer was to let the Jedi faith fade into history. For 6 years, Luke Skywalker lived in self-imposed exile on Ahch-To. The galaxy continued its cycle of conflict without him. The New Republic, which had seemed so promising after Endor, failed to learn from the mistakes of its predecessor. As the First Order rose from the ashes of the Empire, Luke remained isolated on his island, disconnected from the Force and from those who still believed in him. That isolation was shattered in 34 ABY when a young woman named Rey landed on Arch-2. She arrived in a ship Luke never expected to see again, the Millennium Falcon, accompanied by Chewbacca and R2-D2. In her hands, she carried Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, the weapon Luke had lost along with his hand in Cloud City decades earlier. Rey had been sent by Leia, now a general leading the resistance against the First Order. She came seeking the legendary Luke Skywalker, hoping he would return to save the galaxy once more. What she found instead was a broken man, unwilling to engage with the conflicts that had shaped his life. When she offered him his father's lightsaber, Luke took one look at it and tossed it carelessly over his shoulder, walking away without a word. The Luke Skywalker of Octo bore little resemblance to the hero of the rebellion. Dressed in ragged clothing, subsisting on green milk harvested from native sea creatures and fish caught with massive spears, he had deliberately separated himself from civilization. He made it clear to Rey that he had come to the island to die and for the Jedi to end with him. Rey persisted, following Luke around the island despite his attempts to drive her away. Her determination reminded him of his own youthful stubbornness on Dagobah, when Yoda had initially refused to train him. But where Yoda had eventually relented, Luke remained firm in his refusal to train Rey or return to the fight against the First Order. It took the intervention of an old friend to shake Luke from his resolute isolation. R2-D2, who had kept himself in low power mode since Luke's disappearance, awakened fully and projected the original holographic message from Leia to Obi-Wan Kenobi, the same message that had started Luke's journey so many years before. This emotional appeal, reminding Luke of his own beginnings, finally broke through. Luke agreed to give Rey 3 lessons about the Force, though not with the intention of training her as a Jedi. Instead, he wanted to show her why the Jedi needed to end. His first lesson emphasized that the Force did not belong to the Jedi. It was something larger, existing in the balance between extremes rather than in dogmatic interpretations. As the lessons progressed, Luke observed something that disturbed him deeply. Rey possessed raw power equal to what he had seen in Ben Solo, and she seemed drawn toward the darkness in similar ways. His concern grew when he discovered Rey communicating with Kylo Ren through a Force bond, a connection that allowed them to see and speak to each other across vast distances. This discovery triggered memories of his failure with Ben. Luke abruptly ended the lessons, refusing to continue down a path he feared would create another Kylo Ren. His reaction frustrated Rey, who demanded to know the truth about why Luke had cut himself off from everyone who loved him. She had heard Kylo Ren's version of what happened the night the temple was destroyed, and she wanted Luke's account. Luke initially placed all blame on Ben, describing a student who had turned against him and destroyed everything he had built. But when confronted by Rey, who sensed there was more to the story, Luke finally admitted the full truth. He confessed his momentary impulse to kill Ben after seeing the darkness in his mind, and how that brief consideration had become the catalyst for Ben's fall. Despite this revelation, Rey maintained her belief that Kylo Ren could be turned back to the light. She insisted there was still good in him, just as Luke had once believed about Vader. Luke remained unconvinced, having lost the faith in redemption that had once defined him. When Rey left Ahch-To to confront Kylo Ren, believing she could bring him back, Luke chose to remain behind. With Rey gone, Luke made a fateful decision. He climbed to the ancient Uneti tree that housed the original Jedi texts, intending to burn them, and with them, the last remnants of the Jedi Order. As he hesitated, a familiar presence manifested behind him. The Force ghost of Yoda appeared, still able to interact with the physical world enough to call down lightning and ignite the tree himself. In their final meeting, Yoda imparted one last lesson to his former student. Failure, Yoda explained, was the greatest teacher of all. The true burden of masters was to rise above their own failures and help the next generation grow beyond them. This encounter helped Luke reconnect to the Force and recognize that his isolation had been a mistake, not a solution. Shortly after, Luke sensed through his renewed connection to the Force that the Resistance was cornered on the mineral planet Crate. Led by his sister Leia, the last fighters of the Resistance faced annihilation at the hands of Kylo Ren and the First Order. With no ships able to reach him in time, Luke did something no Jedi had ever accomplished before. Through intense concentration, Luke projected a lifelike image of himself across the galaxy to Crate. This projection was so perfect that even those who knew him well could not tell it was not physically him. He appeared younger, with trimmed hair and beard, wearing the robes of a Jedi Master and carrying the blue lightsaber that had been destroyed in reality during Rey's confrontation with Kylo Ren. This phantasm walked out to face the entire First Order army alone, buying precious time for the Resistance to escape. When Kylo Ren ordered every weapon to fire on Luke, he emerged unscathed from the barrage, demonstrating power that astonished everyone watching. Enraged, Kylo Ren descended to face his former master personally. In their confrontation, Luke apologized for failing Ben, but warned that the war was just beginning. Despite Kylo's attacks, Luke's image remained untouched by the red lightsaber. Only after allowing the surviving Resistance members to escape did Luke reveal the truth. He was not physically present. The effort of maintaining such a detailed projection across such a vast distance was unprecedented in Jedi history. Back on Ahch-To, the strain of this feat took its toll on Luke's physical body. Having accomplished what he set out to do, Luke dragged himself to a rocky outcrop overlooking the ocean. There, as the twin suns set in a scene reminiscent of his youth on Tatooine, Luke Skywalker became one with the Force. His body faded away as he joined his father and former masters in the cosmic force. But death was not the end of Luke Skywalker's influence on the galaxy. His final act had ensured the survival of the Resistance and inspired hope throughout the galaxy. Stories of Luke facing down the entire First Order spread to the farthest reaches of space, rekindling belief in the Jedi and their values. Even more directly, Luke's spirit continued to guide Rey. When she discovered her heritage as a descendant of Emperor Palpatine and exiled herself to Ahch-To in despair, Luke's Force ghost appeared to her. Having learned from his own mistakes, he admitted he had been wrong to cut himself off from everything. He encouraged Rey to face her grandfather, the resurrected Emperor, giving her his X-Wing that had been submerged in the waters around the island. After Palpatine's final defeat, Luke's spirit appeared once more alongside Leia's when Rey visited the Lars homestead on Tatooine. There, Rey buried both Luke and Leia's lightsabers in the sand, creating a memorial to the Skywalker twins. When a passing stranger asked her name, Rey chose to honor those who had become her true family, calling herself Rey Skywalker. Through this adoption, the Skywalker name lived on, not through bloodline, but through choice and legacy. The journey that began with a farm boy gazing at twin suns had come full circle. Luke Skywalker had traveled from naivety to wisdom, from impulsiveness to patience, from seeking adventure to finding purpose. His story remains one of the most complex in the galaxy, a tale of triumph and failure, isolation and connection, darkness and light, and ultimately of hope reborn when all seemed lost.